What is one thing that we're not talking about enough that we should talk about more?
Wow, so many different thoughts. Pornography is one.
Well, that's a good one.
Yeah, pornography. I think it's the elephant in the room for a lot of conversations that people are having. Has gosh, don't even get me started. I could talk about this one at length, but it plays a large role in the alienation of women from men and men from women, and creates an underclass and a invitation into secrecy and compartmentalization on the one hand. But it also, I mean, if you just study the effects of porn on the brain, it is it lessens empathy. Users have less empathy towards others. They're less attracted to in-person partners, so they're less able to connect properly with a loved one in terms of physical intimacy and romance. It causes all kinds of physical issues, impotence and erectile dysfunction, and it alienates men and women from each other. Not to mention the fact that on average, kids are exposed to porn in the United States at about age 9 now. So
9?
you think about, and that's not like looking at a picture in Playboy of a woman's breasts. That's hardcore pornography that kids are exposed to with multiple partners and violence and things like that. So if you have little kids who are seeing images like that from way before they've developed their own kind of sexual self-concept and even held a hand, or kissed somebody, your introduction to sex and sexuality is through pornography. I think it's an incredibly dangerous force and it also makes up, like, it's at least a third of internet traffic is people looking at porn. So it's an elephant in the room. So that's one.
Reverence, a respect between the sexes. I really think that that's what we need to come back to, because I think a respect between the sexes, respecting our differences, but also our shared humanity, is at the core of the marriage crisis, the dating crisis, the family crisis, attachment trauma, generational trauma. If you have a man and a woman, they're both flawed and they both have issues and triggers and different wounds. And this narrative from culture is coming in like, women just, want to control men, and they just want a paycheck, and they just want to, I could just watch porn instead. I could just jerk off and I could just watch porn. I don't even need it to treat women with respect. And also, like, women are, beneath me or whatever. And then the culture is saying to women, men are only going to lie to you. Men, are only going to use you for sex. They're useless. They're stupid. You don't need a man. Like, these negative cultural messages are teaching the sexes to hate each other, to hate themselves, and to hate reality. Because the reality is, there is a beautiful union that creates life between the sexes. And that ability to create life is through love. And through love, we can have marriage and family. And through love, we have what makes life worthwhile in every possible domain. But if we're saying, no, you cannot respect men, or you cannot respect women, how can you possibly respect yourself?
Fatherlessness, the lack of fathers in the home. Like, I think that should be the number one. Like, and you've heard like Vance say it and like Vivek say it, but it's not like echoed in like literature. It's not echoed in what we're being taught. It's not like, all I had to do was like search, how many drug addicts or people that become drug addicts grew up in a single family household. So that is a main factor for a lot of different, like, not having two-parent households, or dads not leaving, or it'd be okay for dads to hit it and quit it and just leave and just never come back. And like, that's causing, if you look at how like women, like young girls and young adult women are like kind of acting, behaving, this OnlyFans crap. Where's your dad? Where's your dad? Because he wouldn't be okay with this.
Well, I think like specifically in the therapy profession, like we have to be talking about liberation and decolonial psychologies being like applied on people. I think that's crossing a huge line. It's tremendously dangerous, and it's still kind of, I think, like maybe a little bit new because it's coinciding, I'd say, with like what people would call the material turn of the revolution. So it's something that I would say just started like 2024-ish. So it's not maybe like fresh in our minds. So like resisting and talking about like decolonial liberation practices, both in counseling and outside of it, very important. Broadly, I think we like need to be concerned about, I mean, frankly, like what people call the woke right, or like the potential for a fascist reaction to the communist provocation. I think that's something that I think we are like increasingly talking about, but I still think people are a little bit in denial about it.
Honestly, it's the animals. I think that it's one of those things where it's like, again, like people like to think that, you know, under Nazi rule, they would have hidden, like, you know, helped the Jews and stuff like that, right? And like, I think that nowadays, like, this is your chance. This is like there are animals that are being treated absolutely horribly, and there are things you can do. And we just don't like to talk about it because we're all complicit in it. And like, if we all just like took a step back, yeah, we would see that this is like, there's like, you know, you think like, oh, hey, like people used to think that like slavery was just totally fine, right? And then we look back and we're like, oh, come on, right? Like that's so obviously not fine, right? And then you think the obvious next question is, what are we doing that's like that? And like almost certainly one of the things we're doing right now is that we're not like like people judge like you can judge a community based on how they treat the least of the people, like the least powerful people, and the least powerful people on the planet right now are animals. And so we should use our power for good and not just for selfish reasons.
Final question
Yeah.
is, what is something that we're not talking about that we should be talking about?
Trigonometry.
I got it from you.
Yeah. I think in the therapy world, what we're not addressing enough is the absolute damage of feminism and to the therapy world and to men. And I think the Gad Saad is really the one talking about it in Suicidal Empathy, like we were talking about. But I think we really need to look at what feminism did to our field in promoting postmodern, intersectional, blah, blah, and gender studies and trying to teach men that they had to feel ashamed is like an early expression of the white guilt thing, you know, is the toxic masculinity trope that started, you know, with second wave feminism in the 70s and the therapists that entered the field thinking men need to be more vulnerable. And so I think there's something about the damage that feminism did to the theories of psychology that needs to be talked about. I hear it in philosophical spheres. I don't hear it in therapy.
Well, I think we got to be talking about porn. You know, how we talk about it and when we talk about it definitely matters, because we don't need to be talking about it all day. And we don't need to be talking about it with all ages and all populations at all times. But we need to have the courage to talk about it directly, not beat around the bush, not make it out to be like it's something that some people have. And, you know, if you have that problem, let's talk on the side. If we are in a room full of men, we can assume that whatever high percentage of them have had negative consequences from porn, and they would benefit from a conversation that included honesty about porn. So, I mean, that's the one that comes to mind. But I will say this, though, is that I'm more inclined to answer the question by saying that we need to stop talking about serious things all the time, because that seems like that's all we're doing. And that's part of the reason why I do comedy in my therapy. And that's part of the reason why I take serious conversations and I turn them into joking conversations, because I think we're always trying to find this deep topic to talk about. And sometimes we have to sit together and just be like, ha, 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 life is funny. Don't you think this is a good cigar? Yes, I do. Like, it doesn't have to be this crazy exchange of ideas all the time. And I think that we can calm down a little bit on all sides of it.
I think we really do need to be talking about what we call cluster B, what we call narcissism, victim offender reversals, inversions. I would like to see, and I think we are seeing more. I see more of this conversation happening online, but I'd like to see a lot more public conversation and family conversation, even school curriculum conversation about psychological abuse dynamics, how they work, how they trap people, the similarity. Because what I'm describing, I use the term cluster B a lot, but it's just as accurate to describe it as authoritarian, as actually fascist, as actually a cult. Cluster B rules are the rules that cults use, that authoritarian governments use, that our government uses. These are, you know, we're all talking about the same actual real world psychological phenomena. That's why I do Disaffected, because I think we need to name and put under the microscope what exactly is driving us here. And it's not the whole answer, but I think what I focus on is a big part of the answer that has to be talked about and understood if we're to get past it.